The remainder would be I would like to make a huge poster for the collective here on Earth. With your permission, could you describe briefly each hybrid race that is involved in the human DNA? And yes,
The idea of the creation of the DNA, yes?
yes, in what would help the collective in that sense? Like how many species and how they look that are involved in the DNA, sorry.
Yes. Understand, in different timelines, there are different versions of the creation story and the human development, and you actually shift between the different timelines at different periods of time. However, across those different timelines, there are particularly 8 species that remain consistent throughout the different timeline variations of the human creation origin. In some
Yes.
timelines, there are others that are not present in all of them. Do you understand?
Yes, the number 8 was the initial one we had picked, so that was very synchronistic.
Yes. Now, we will proceed with describing some of these beings, understanding that not all of them in that way have names. However, they do have characteristics that can be utilized as an image for better understanding their energies and creating the idea of deeper connections with them. All right?
Are these visual or more character personality?
They, in that sense, are a little bit of both. You can use it however you wish. Because
Okay.
remember, at its core, it is all energy.
Yes.
But as these beings then materialize, they begin to take on characteristics. Now, not all of these beings are in a materialized form of expression anymore. Many of them have evolved past that. However, you can still express it however you wish, because the idea is the imagery will have that effect on the subconscious that then triggers the knowingness in the DNA of that connected relationship.
Thank you.
Yes, you are quite welcome. Now, in relationship to the idea of extraterrestrials that are in alignment with the idea of the creation of DNA, the first group in that way is what we consider to be carrion, avian, bird. These would be, in that sense, slightly humanoid beings that are feathered. These beings are highly responsible in many ways for the DNA project. Understanding that the DNA that was brought to Earth, in that sense, that the ones you consider to be the Anunnaki, shared with the idea of Sasquatch, had, in that sense, origins and aspects of it that were compiled by a variety of different species. Understanding what you consider to be carrion in that way, avian, is also a component of your genetics. In addition to this, you also have what you consider to be feline aspects of DNA. Feline humanoid beings are also associated with augmentations to the human DNA at various points within the human evolution.
Yes.
All right. Now, moving forward, there are also, in that sense, saurian genetic materials that are associated with what you consider to be human DNA. These were, of course, inserted at later points within the human development. Understanding what you consider to be more reptilian aspects of this. We understand that name has a lot of judgment in your collective, understanding not all factions in that sense, and not all species within that saurian expression are what you would consider to be negative. There are many that are quite benevolent, and there are benevolent ones that we are also in interaction and communication with. Understanding that these beings have also made changes to the DNA. There are also, in that sense, what you consider to be Andromedan beings that are associated with the idea of augmentation, of changes to the human DNA. In terms of their appearance, because we understand that that does not necessarily clarify what the energy of these beings is or their appearance. To clarify a little bit on how you may visually perceive them, you would understand them to also be humanoid. In many ways, their skin is glowing. They allow for a great deal of photonic light to be processed through their system in such an amplified way that it appears as if they are literally glowing. Both the male and females within this collective grow the hair very long. They both, in that sense, have what you consider to be long hair. Oftentimes, the hair is also white. You could consider it to be golden, depending, of course, on your perceptions. These beings have also made augmentations, changes to the DNA at varying times. Understanding what you consider to be Pleiadian consciousness has also made changes to the DNA at different times. Understanding these beings in that way are also humanoid. They look very similar to you. Their hair color varies. Their eye color varies. The skin color also varies. The idea is they are a little bit taller than you, generally, for your collective. Moving forward now, there are in that way amphibious beings of Sirius that are also in that way responsible for augmentations throughout time. Many of these augmentations were made during contact experiences, during the times of Egypt, during the times of Atlantis, during the times of Lemuria, and also what you consider to be a more pre-civilization aspect of your human development. When we say pre-civilization, it's not implying there were no civilizations, but they were not as unified at that point in time. These beings, in many ways, if you were to perceive them, are very different in terms of how they look from one another, but in general, you would understand them as having webbed fingers, webbed toes. You would also be able to observe gills present on the neck in some of them. Some of them are scaled, but some of them are also not scaled. Some of them would have skin similar to what you consider to be dolphin skin. Moving forward, there are also beings that you'd understand in that way to be Lyran beings. Lyran beings in many ways share connections to what we have described as the feline, but understand not all beings from the Lyra system are in that sense feline in nature. You also have, again, humanoid components there. These humanoid components also look very similar to you. They are in that way more physicalized than the Pleiadians, more physicalized than the Andromedans. They also vary in their appearance, some of them in that sense, maybe slightly different heights, different skin colors, different eye colors, different hair colors. There are also in this way what you'd consider to be insectoids. Mantid is one of them, but not all of them. The idea is that the beings that fit into the insectoid category are a part of a great deal of networks that are, in many ways, physical reality planets that you would consider to be gigantic jungles, gigantic rainforests across the whole planet that is balanced with the idea of oceans. In these worlds, there are, in many ways, gigantic mushrooms, there are gigantic trees, and the idea is that just as you walk around in your forests and you can look up and see the mushrooms, or rather, you can see the trees, you can look up and notice you are a part of that forest network. It's the same for these beings as they begin to move around their network. Some of them are very familiar to what you have on Earth, such as the idea of the mantids, or in that sense, butterfly humanoids, insectoid, in that sense, expressions of insects where they are bipedal, or they have the ability to stand. Many of them in that way have multiple legs. This is, in that way, another group that has also made direct alterations to the DNA, and they have also assisted a great deal of other civilizations in their own alteration projects. All right. The next group we shall mention at this time is what you consider to be Arcturian consciousness, but earlier in its development, much earlier in its development, when it was, in that sense, less non-physicalized. This group has also made a great deal of augmentations, a great deal of changes in the human genetic expression as it progressed throughout its evolution. This, in many ways, is still something that is done from time to time in relationship to the idea of allowing for the genetic expression of your people to be more up to date with the idea of your collective consciousness's acceleration and expansion into higher densities of perception. The idea is that when there are certain accelerations within the collective consciousness, the idea would be that the DNA does not always have the ability to support those types of perceptions due to what you consider to be older models of it, of the DNA. So Arcturian consciousness, in that sense, will still make augmentations to DNA, allowing for, in that way, your continuing generations to be able to more greatly perceive the idea of more non-physicalized energies, allowing for greater soul memory, you could say, the idea of knowing and remembering who they are as they incarnate upon your planet. These are the beings we are able to mention at this time in relationship to the major players that are very much involved in different genetic programs in relationship to your DNA, and that have made changes to your DNA throughout your species evolution within the physical reality framework.
Thank you, Riok.
And thank you for your question and your expression of yourself in the now. Is there anything else you would like to address with us this day of your time in this way?
Other than saying thank you for the channeling lessons, and of course, thank you for being you. No, thank you.
And thank you for being yourself as well. Our unconditional love to you always and to all whom you encounter on your sacred journey of human expression.